Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to transform these failed resin pours into some nice decorative pieces. Now for those of you who don't know, this is actually a fail from my Thixotropic agent test, and what happened is that I used very old resin that flash cured in a weird way, and it left these really strange but cool looking bubbles on top of both pieces. So I decided, instead of throwing them away and calling them a failed piece, I really wanted to highlight these cool features and make something very fun out of them. So I started by marking the edges just with an acrylic marker to mark where the pretty colorful splotches were. And then I started by conditioning some clay. And I'm rolling it out in a very thin sheet that will just be used to cover up most of the spheres. Of course, resin and clay doesn't bond, but there is a way to help it to be at least a decent bit sturdier, and that is Bacon Bond. So here I'm just using the Sculpting brand Bacon Bond. By the way, the clay I'm using here is just a normal Sculpting original. And I just chose this because it's a bit more sturdy. And I thought, especially in this thin kind of setting, this may be perfect, unlike for medium that I usually use for sculpting. This clay will, when I touch it for a while, not get too soft. So that's why my choice went to this. And all I'm doing is I'm breaking off pieces of this thinly rolled out clay and just slowly adding them one by one to cover up the entire outside without covering up the bubbles. Now, one unfortunate thing I found out is that Thixotropic agent is not really good at keeping the benefits of having the light pass through the object, even if you use very light colorants. So sadly, even though I would have loved to have this as a light up piece, since there is no light actually passing through at all, I just opted for a non-light up piece. But I think in the end it would have looked really amazing if it would have been able to light up from the base. Anyways, after covering this piece, I just went in and cut out some chunks of the side walls right where I marked on top. And I vaguely remembered which height they were by looking at the markings, because I made a little line on varying heights, and in the end it worked out really well. Next up, I added a little rim, and at this point you can totally tell what I'm making. Of course, from the title to I'm making some potion brewing kettles. So I just rolled out a long wormy dealy, flattened it on both sides, cut off one of the sides to have a flat base, and then I'm using some Bacon Bond and my silicone shaper tool just to blend this into the top to get a cauldron shape. It will not be a perfect cauldron shape, considering that we're limited by how the bubbling formed, and that it has a lip on both pieces that I cannot basically sculpt over, or else it will look weird. But I just want the shape to actually look potion kettle-like, and I think I managed that pretty well. Now the cutouts I chose to make a bit rugged, and I thought just making potion kettles with the top showing would be very boring, considering we have this very beautiful almost galaxy or nebula effect on the side. So that is why I chose to make these random cutouts to highlight them. And then to give it a beaten metal, hammered metal look, I just used my ball stylus and literally tapped or hammered the side of this piece, just to, give it more of this copper hammered look that old kettles can have. Not all of them, but I really thought it would fit a bit more to not have just a smooth piece of clay on top. And the same I did with the other one, just cutting out some random chunks and hoping that I would actually, have the right height and uncover some nice little patterns. And it actually worked out super well. I went a bit more with tiny cuts for the second one, just so they had a bit of variation between two of them. And then again just adding the hammered texture, which by the way was super satisfying to do. Lastly, since I did have some fingerprints on some dirt on there, I just used some isopropanol with like a very soft brush, and in a thin layer just brushed that on to like clean up everything, and it was time to bake. Sadly, after baking, when I tried to remove it from the surface, it like ripped a little chunk out of one of them. The other one was totally fine, but it was nothing that a little bit of super glue couldn't fix. But yeah, this happened because my surface that I use for baking, I used so much that it became a bit rough and the clay stuck to it a bit more than I hoped it would, but again, it was totally fine and fixable. Now, because of the hammering, some of the edges actually got like sunken in from where I did the cut, so I just used a blade and cut all of the edges just like a bit sharper and more ruggedy, just to give more of an illusion like there's something broken or shattered off, even though, you know, in this kind of setting, the kettle being metal, I don't think it would look that way. But still, I thought, you know, just to give it a bit more of a neat look. And it was actually super satisfying because in the end, like, the edges just broke off, since again, they don't hold 100% well on the clay, but more than well enough for my project here. I then made 4 of these like tapered teardrop shaped things that I'm going to use with these copper rings. I just wound some copper wire around like a thicker pencil and cut it with some shears. And in the end, these are gonna be the handles. And I also then decided to detail it just a little bit more with my stylus, just to make it look a little bit nicer. I looked at some of the like standard designs, and it seems like the leaves and floral designs for these kind of handles were quite popular, so that is what I went with. I just went like with a vaguely flower-shaped design, and in this part I apparently was horrible at keeping things within the camera zone. But yeah, basically I am making some like vaguely leaf-shaped objects here. And I think in the end it turned out actually really, really cute. But yeah, afterwards it was just time to bake them once more, and then I can actually paint them. So I'm just going over the edges carefully, and what I mixed here is just some gesso with some black paint, because these surfaces of the clay are quite smooth, especially since I wiped them with the isopropanol, so I just wanted to make sure that the paint gets the best chance at sticking. And you know, I thought, why not mix in some black already with the gesso to also give it a base coat, so I don't have to add gesso, then a base coat, and then the paint on top. And it actually worked out super, super well. I didn't mix in too much black paint, I just used a very potent one, since I didn't know how like the binder in the black paint, since it's acrylic, acts with like the binder that's used for the gesso. Since gesso is there to like prime surfaces, and I didn't want to obviously take the property away and have paint chip off. But it worked out pretty well in the end. While cleaning off the rings, I actually discovered I could just pull them out very easily, since these are copper wire, so it's soft, which helped tremendously in the later painting, and I can just add them back in when I'm finished with things. And then it was time to paint the base layer. Since I'm going with a metallic look, I decided to go with a warmer red tone as the base, since the copper and gold colors I'm adding on top will pop a bit more. I found that like oranges and reds are, or like sometimes even browns, are the perfect base color for like these kind of warmer toned copper metallic paints, since they don't usually cover that well. And it just gives it a little bit more of like a glow instead of just having black, although they will definitely also pop really well on the black base coat. And as you can see, the red wasn't that, you know, potent or opaque anyways. It just gives it a nice background sheen. And then I just started off with some copper metallic paint on top with a sponge, but in the end I decided I'm just going to go in with a brush, since that was quicker. By the way, the paints I'm using here for the metallics, they are Vallejo model paints. And they may not be the most covering, but they're excellent for like metal dry brushing to give like the hint of metal looks, I found. Though they definitely need a couple coats if you want like an actual like strong metallic sheen out of them. But I really like them and the shades they come in. So that's what I decided to use in this case. And at this point I'm not too worried about like covering any of the whole things. Now I can already tell that in the end actually I had to like go over things a little bit more, and actually here before I painted the gold what I didn't show was that I added some like clear tape just in the holes to like cover them up. That's why I'm not too worried about applying the gold in this very like over painting manner. Now I didn't do that for the black yet, so I will have to clean that up a bit later. But yeah, for the gold before that I just covered every single one of the resin holes with this plastic to make sure that like I don't have to clean up too much. And I also wanted to spray varnish just with a matte varnish after I painted all the details. And for that I needed to cover them because I wanted them to keep this like galaxy sheen that the resin has. So, you know, the plastic foil definitely helped with that. It was just like normal packaging tape that I just wedged in there and then cut with an X-Acto knife. But yeah, I totally lost the footage somewhere sadly. So I cannot show you guys, but it was a very simple process. And again, since it's clear tape, you cannot really see it anyways. But yeah, I then painted all of these handles just in this like dark black to hopefully give it more of an iron-esque look. And then in the end I mixed up some brown wash and just like applied it liberally all over before dabbing it off with a paper towel. Just a slight bit to like have it look just a tiny bit more aged. Though I will keep like most of the sheen the metal gives. And then of course when that was dried I varnished it with just some matte spray varnish. I just grabbed one of my matte spray varnish bottles, I couldn't even tell you guys which one. But I think it actually helped in the end to bring the look of this like metal across. And then of course I had to like remove all the tape, which also worked out really well. I also needed stand, so I just made like a very simple like ring shape with a like sphere cutout in the middle and added some like triangles as legs. These are very simple, just 3D printed and painted black. Again, to make it look a bit more like metal, and these I also varnished. And then after removing the tape, I still had like a decent bit of metallic that like seeped into the edges. Packaging tape really wasn't like the sturdiest choice, but a little bit of scraping with a palette knife helped greatly cleaning things up. And then it was time to like fill in all of the bubbles on top. I was really worried because the material there is super thin, like the resin, and I was worried that like one drop and all of the bubbles would like break off and leave like tiny chunks of resin everywhere and destroy the look. So I just used some like water effect paste. And this actually worked super well to just fill in the holes, and this will dry completely clear. It will just take like a great while to actually dry. But instead of UV resin I thought this was a little bit better because it's a little easier to correct and handle, and UV resin, you know, is just a bit more tricky in this regard, and it worked out super well in the end. And here you can see both of the final results, and I have to say, I love them. You know, you have this like galaxy effect. Some of the holes in the areas where the resin was uncovered, some of the micro holes got filled with the metallic oil paint, but I still think it looks absolutely gorgeous. And like the effects of like, you know, practically having a bubbling potion in these kettles and having the cutout to like see inside of the potion, see how magically it like glistens with like all the materials just like floating in there, so to speak. I really think this highlights how the resin pour like looked really well, and it covers up all of the like boring black areas and of course it also highlights the bubbles really well. Was actually taking the shots, this was like over a week after I sculpted it, and you can still see it's a little bit milky on top, but in like half a month or so this should like dry completely clear. It just takes a while longer since some of the holes and surfaces were pretty like deep where I applied the wave paste. But yeah, I think like the metal look fits super well with the color scheme that the resin pour had, and I'm just super happy I got to turn something that was initially a fail into a really cool display piece, or two I should say. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this transformation, and also let me know if you had any resin fails or like project fails that you then managed to save by turning them into completely different projects. And as always, I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!